Finally, let's talk a little bit about ethics and codes of conduct. I've talked about the law. The law is relatively straightforward. Well, to a point. Sometimes it seems rather cryptic when you read the law, but the law is concrete. The law is defined. Ethics, on the other hand, is more of a judgment call. It's very subjective. So laws are very objective, where ethics can be rather subjective. And just because something is legal doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical. So sometimes we have to think outside the box of the law. Sometimes it's so hard to, or it's so easy rather, to look at all these laws and develop these frameworks and develop these policies that comply with the law, but then kind of forget about what's right and what's wrong. Just because the law says that you don't have to tell customers that you lost their information doesn't mean that we shouldn't tell them. Maybe that's the right thing to do. So, Google is famous for saying, do no harm, don't be evil, right? So Google has a kind of a famous tagline that they're not going to be evil. They're always going to try to do what's ethical, or what they, in their judgment, believe is ethical, or what their customers will interpret as ethical. So to that end, first, there's certainly some codes of conduct for IT security. One of the things about IT security that's important to understand is that a lot of trust is placed in IT security. There's a lot of IT security has a lot of access. If you think about it, in security in general, right? Think about a security guard, and we'll talk more about physical security and security guards later on, and the psychology of that. But if you think about a security guard, they have to have the keys to everything, right? They have to be able to get everywhere in the building. So there's a tremendous amount of trust for someone who's in that type of position. Um, Likewise, in IT security, there's a lot of trust that people put in IT security. We have the passwords for everything. We have access to everything. So there's certainly a lot of ethical and conduct concerns there. It's very easy to step outside what is appropriate conduct. For example, in many cases, we have access to firewalls and access to log files and access to the proxy servers and things like that. And it would be very easy for us to look at the traffic that's going through these devices and read the emails that are going through the email servers and read the instant messages going back and forth between our employees, for example, where there's some expectation of privacy. So in other words, we might have the ability to snoop on this stuff, and it's important to understand that while we have the ability to do that, and it might not be in violation of a policy, for example, because we have the authority to do that, it's not always ethical to do things like that. So, and we certainly don't want to alienate our users and management because we violated what they perceive to be some code of ethics. So if you start to go down that dark path, it's very difficult to come back from that. So it's always important to be cognizant of that. So first, as far as codes of conduct goes, we want to obey the law for sure. Dress and act professionally. That goes without saying, right? Avoid any conflicts of interest. So for example, with vendors and things like that, for sure, you want to avoid conflicts of interest. Avoid outside employment. This is from a list that I got of codes of conduct for IT security, but I have to say, outside employment, I kind of disagree with that one. I do a lot of outside employment from all of my jobs. I work at a lot of different jobs. I teach at several different schools. I can do consulting. I do a lot of work. So that doesn't always apply, the avoid outside employment. But again, it depends on the organization. Engage in good public relations through community activities. Avoid activities with customers or suppliers that would raise suspicion of favoritism or activities that result in personal gain. In other words, you're going to lunch with Barracuda, who's a firewall company, every other week, and then when it comes time to buy a new firewall, surprise, surprise, you picked Barracuda, right? So you certainly want to avoid that. Use organizational resources and funds for business purposes only. Always maintain accuracy in your books, records, and communications. Separate personal from business activity. In other words, avoid using your business email for personal business. It's pretty common, I think, for people to use their business email for personal stuff, but we want to try to avoid that in IT security if we can, and then maintain privacy and confidentiality of all business-related information. So this is just some basic code of conduct guidelines that you could consider, or things to think about. In RFC 1087, if you're not familiar with the RFCs, which is so the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force, has these RFCs. Anybody can write an RFC, and then it can be adopted as sort of an informal standard. A lot of our standards are RFCs, even though they're rather informal. For example, TCP/IP, which is the very bedrock of all of the networking that we do in modern networks, is an RFC. It was started as an RFC written in 1981, which is a long time ago. But RFCs, there's certainly a lot of them, but one of them is 1087, Ethics in the Internet. It's a nice little read. If you read RFC 1087, it talks about ethics on the internet. So some of the main points are it's not ethical to seek to gain unauthorized accesses to resources on the internet. It's unethical to disrupt any intended use of the internet. You don't want to waste resources, things like doing spam. It talks about that, denial of service attacks, destroying the integrity of computer-based information. It's very broad, RFC 1087, but it's a nice read. It's something worth taking a look at, and it does present a nice, very broad framework of ethics and the internet. And the internet, by the way, is more than just the World Wide Web, right? So it's all the infrastructure and all that underlies the World Wide Web and the internet. So ISC Squared, which is we talked about them before. This is the group that does it's they do CISSP, I believe. ISC Squared. I don't think they do there's an audit certification you can get as well, but I don't believe ISC Squared does that one. But they are well known for CISSP, which is a pretty well known IT security credential that I would encourage if you're going to work in IT security. It's certainly a good credential to get. You do have to get some industry experience usually before you can obtain that credential, but you've certainly taken a good first step here. So some codes of ethics: protect society, the Commonwealth, and the infrastructure. Act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly. Provide diligent and competent service to principals, and principals being, the people who are really kind of in management, right? Would be considered the principals. And advance and protect the profession.